So, Bradbury was writing at a time during the Cold War, and this was between the former Soviet Union, it's called the USSR, or the Soviet Union, and the USA. It was an arms race to gain military superiority, and it was after World War II, and so in World War II the atomic bomb had been used, nuclear bomb, and as a result, what were they trying to get here with this bomb? Alright, I guess that's a bomb of some sort. Well, it was a nuclear arms race. Okay, so at this time, during the Cold War, there was also other issues going on in the US. And so connected to the Cold War was a kind of witch hunt, we would call it, in quotation marks. And that was against anyone who was communist, or anyone who seemed to be anti-democratic. And so you have in the US people being banned from having certain kinds of literature and art. So they ban art, music, and books. Even musicians and artists are blacklisted, which means they can't work, they can't get a job, any official company can't hire them. And if you're on that blacklist in the US, then you're suspected of sympathizing with the communists and the USSR, Soviet Union. And so there's this idea of banning and censorship, which is obviously important in the novel, because in this dystopian future that Bradbury predicted, people are not allowed to own books, and the books are collected by the firefighters and burned, of course. So that's a direct form of censorship, and it's censorship enforced by the government. And that's important because it's the US government doing this kind of censorship. Well, it means, are they really any better than the Soviet Union communists, who the US is saying is so bad? Okay, so we have also another issue going on around this time, which had to do with nuclear missiles, and that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Sorry for the writing, I'm still learning how to use this tablet, and it's not as clear as I would like it. I don't really know how to use it properly. So anyway, so during this Cuban Missile Crisis, they almost have nuclear war with Cuba. And Cuba's really close to the US. And it was under the president JFK, that's John F. Kennedy, that this Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I'll show you a picture of him. Okay, so there's Kennedy. He was later assassinated, but at the time he was the president during the Cold War was just ramping up. There was a space race, who could get to the moon first, and we had the battle between the US and the USSR, as you can see from there. Another factor that was in the back of Ray Bradbury's mind as he thought about the United States having censorship was this issue of Germany and book burnings that were run by the Nazis before World War II and during World War II as well. There were these mass book burnings where people came out, brought all their books, and they were actually burning them and censoring different materials. Lots of young people were involved in that in Germany. Okay, so Bradbury has these issues in mind in the background because we see later that this whole issue of nuclear war is constantly in the background in Fahrenheit 451. So in terms of our author and his context, okay, we have to be aware of that whole Cold War context, but we also have to be aware of the rise of mass media. Okay, and the mass media part means global forms of communication. Okay, so for example, we had already had radio before that, but TV was becoming a hugely popular media form. Okay, so this whole rise of mass communication with the advent of TV, you had a more kind of passive audience. It was, in a way, less social because there was less family conversation and quality time together. And so the role of media, the role of mass media is important. The role of technology in the novel. And then also addictiveness of mass media is another factor. So we're going to see addictiveness of mass media, being passive as an audience. That's going to be very important, like with Mildred, for example. And all of these things together regarding media basically make for the issue of less critical thinking. And so people are controlled by the government because they stop learning how to think. They become passive consumers of information rather than actually analyzing that information. It's just consumption. It's just entertainment based kind of approach. Okay, so we've got the Cold War in the background, some historical and cultural context, specifically the arms race, the threat of nuclear disaster being in the background, the witch hunting of communist sympathizers in the United States, which was under a guy named MacArthur, or McCarthyism. Okay, and they were blacklisting people, putting people even in jail, censoring books, censoring all kinds of artwork, art forms. You had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States almost actually got in a nuclear conflict because the Soviets were supporting Cuba, and they were going to give them weapons. Okay, and then the role of mass media. That's another very important topic in the book. And remember, we have said about our sci-fi and dystopian genres that it's predictive, but how it's based on whatever was current for the author, the current trends. So these were current trends: Cold War, nuclear threat, arms race, the space race, the idea of speed and shortening of attention spans of people, so people reading less books, watching more TV, listening to more radio, things like that. These are all in the background in the novel, and also very, very directly linked together. And of course, carrying on from what we have talked about before, in all of these things, we want to think about propaganda, and we want to think about advertising, and how is the government using propaganda and advertising to actually control the population and use the media. Okay, so some of the things to be aware of and to think about in terms of the background in the historical and cultural context.